Hello, everyone, and welcome to Crypto and Policy. This is our bi-weekly regulatory focused show hosted by me, Jen Sanasie, and my co-host, partner at Paul Hastings, Renato Mariotti. Renato, how is it going?
I'm doing well. I've been dealing with regulators myself a lot lately, but looking forward to today. We're going to have a really action-packed discussion.
I mean, that's why I love co-hosting this show with you. You are in the thick of it, dealing with the things that we talk about every other week. We have a guest joining us at the top of the show. We're going to get to him right now, but stick around for the whole show because after this segment, we're going to be talking about former FTX executive Caroline Ellison's upcoming sentence. Now, before I bring the guest in, I want to remind everyone you have the ability to ask questions. We are live on social media, so make sure you put your comments, your questions below this video, and we will try to get to them. Our guest today has won the Massachusetts Republican primary and will now take on Elizabeth Warren for a seat in the Senate. John Deaton joins the show now. John, welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
Of course. Thank you for being here. Now, let's just start with the bare basics. Lay a foundation for me here. Why are you running for Senate? Why are you taking Elizabeth Warren on? She's been in the seat for 6 years. Talk to us about what's motivating you to continue on this race.
Well, she's the epitome of what happens in Washington, D.C. If people remember 13 years ago, she promised to go to Washington to hold the bankers accountable. She was outraged that no banker went to prison from the financial crisis. Well, we fast forward more than a decade later, and those same bankers that she went to hold accountable are writing her bills and financing her campaigns. That's what happens in Washington. She couldn't beat them, so she joined them. And when you look at this country, ground zero is Massachusetts in all of the crisis. Illegal immigration, we're ground zero. People don't think that because they don't think we're a border state, but we have a right to shelter law for anyone who's homeless, and it doesn't require residency. So the government, state government, houses the migrants that show up here and feeds them. It's bankrupting the state. Massachusetts is now second most expensive state to live in. We outdid California. We're only behind Hawaii. That's not something we want to brag about. And so regular people are being priced out of the economy. And I got in the race because this partisanship, hyper-partisan politics where you're loyal to an agenda or a party or a person, it's got to stop. We need people who love this country. I embody the American dream. I want to go to Washington to preserve it. And I'm looking forward to this challenge. I think I'm gonna make history. We're gonna defeat Elizabeth Warren. A lot of people think I'm, full of it, but I'm telling you, they don't know what I know on the streets of Massachusetts.
So, John, one thing you mentioned a challenge. Obviously, it's no secret Massachusetts is an incredibly democratic state. Voted Democratic as throughout my entire lifetime, and I have a few gray hairs, maybe more than a few. It's a stronghold, right, for Democrats. So, are you trying to make a statement here? It sounds like you think that you may have a chance. Why are you taking on this very steep challenge?
Listen, I wouldn't do this if there was no chance to win. I wouldn't have put $1 million of my own money if there was no chance to win. There was a poll last year that showed former Republican Governor Charlie Baker, who used to be the governor in Massachusetts, a Republican, if he were running against her, he would smoke her, crushes her by 15 points. Now, that doesn't directly translate to me. I'm not Governor Baker. I don't have that kind of name recognition, but it shows you how vulnerable she is. She finished third when she ran for president. Bernie Sanders beat her, Joe Biden beat her. She's not very popular here. She has a 41% approval rating. She's passed one bill in 12 years. And so when you take all of that into consideration, plus with the message, she is beatable. She really is. Again, I tell everyone, I don't exaggerate. It's not the widest path to victory, but there's a narrow uphill path to victory. And she's struggling already to oppose me and my candidacy because, it's hard to argue against common sense. And that's what I'm bringing to this race. And let me just add this. This shocks people. 64% of registered voters in Massachusetts are actually independents. It's called unenrolled voters here. And that shocks a lot of people.
I want to narrow the conversation to focus a little bit on the crypto aspect now. We know that you have a more positive outlook on crypto when we compare some of the comments you've made publicly to some of the comments that Elizabeth Warren has made publicly. But if you were to get a Senate seat, talk to me about what your top priorities would be for crypto.
Well, people ask me, am I a pro-crypto candidate? I say, no, I'm just a pro-freedom candidate. I don't believe the government should be in the business of telling you what you can and cannot own. For example, Elizabeth Warren went on Meet the Press and said that Bitcoin was a bad investment. Okay, Elizabeth Warren, don't invest. But don't tell the rest of the world, the rest of America that we can't, and don't present a bill that bans the self-custody of Bitcoin in the United States. And so I'm someone who has fought for smart, tailored regulations in this industry. I don't believe in no regulations. I believe in smart, tailored regulations. And when I get to the Senate, I'm going to educate a lot of the other senators. For example, there's this perception, in part due to Elizabeth Warren and her efforts, that crypto and Bitcoin is a threat to the US dollar. And anyone in this industry knows that smart, tailored stablecoin legislation will actually bolster the US dollar's dominance in the world and its status as a world's reserve currency. And so we can actually, promote and get the demand for the US dollar up by using smart stablecoin legislation. And I would support legislation that ends the opaqueness. The SEC loves for the law to be vague. And we know this from the Ripple litigation that I was involved in on behalf of token holders, where we saw the emails, the intra emails of the SEC, where they were saying, hey, we want it to be vague. And I would end that and basically promote legislation that says, hey, here are some markers that you meet. If you meet these markers, it's a commodity. If you don't meet these markers, then it's going to be a securitized asset. It's a security in the SEC. And in this regulation by enforcement.
So, John, how important is crypto in terms of a motivator for you in this race? In other words, there's a lot of different things you could be doing with your time. You mentioned you're a lawyer. Why this race? Is crypto a part of the rationale for you?
No, I've been calling Senator Warren the crypto candidate in this race because the voters of Massachusetts need to ask themselves, we have multiple crises in this country. Illegal immigration, a debt crisis, inflation, housing crisis, opioid addictions, foreign wars. Yet, despite all of those real world things, like the second most expensive state in the country, she woke up one day and said, I'm going to run for my third term and I'm going to build an anti-crypto army. So Senator Warren is the crypto candidate here. She's hyper focused on crypto and banning Bitcoin, self-custody. I'm focused on the issues that matter. And so, Senator Warren is out there trying to portray me as some guy who is for the crypto billionaires. I've actually upset crypto billionaires in the last 4 years. And I would remind Senator Warren, my book, my memoir about my life is called Food Stamp Warrior, not the Bitcoin or the crypto billionaire warrior. And so I'm looking forward. I can't tell you how much I'm looking forward to.
Who have you upset, John? Who have you upset?
Well, listen, Chris Dixon at A16Z blocked me on social media because I laid out what I viewed as some regulatory capture that took place between Jay Clayton, Bill Hinman, who's a partner there. They're probably not fans of mine because I laid out sort of a timeline that went down when I was in that litigation with the SEC on behalf of XRP holders. I highlighted the fact that Bill Hinman his firm was tied to the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance, yet he gave a speech that gave Ethereum a free regulatory pass. I just shared all that stuff factually. I didn't take aim at anyone. I just said, look, there's these conflicts of interest and there's these appearances of impropriety. And it pissed off a lot of the people in crypto. And so it's ironic that Senator Warren, who's never let truth get in her way, is going to try to portray me as like a stooge for the crypto billionaires. I'm someone who has fought on behalf of token holders, small businesses, against overreach. And I did it pro bono and I did it for free. And I would remind Senator Warren that a lifelong Democratic judge appointed by Barack Obama agreed with this guy. So I'm looking forward to showing the truth about this.
A moment ago, you mentioned that you think it's unfair that you've been attacked by Senator Warren as sort of a person backed by crypto billionaires. But you attacked her a moment ago as being supported by banks. Now, I've heard a lot of criticism of Senator Warren. Certainly in the crypto space, there's a lot of criticism of her. I've never heard her being portrayed as pro banker before. She's certainly very anti Wall Street, as far as I can tell. So why are you focused on that criticism?
Well, listen, you can't pay attention to what they say. You got to pay attention to what they do. So Senator Warren, I believe, is now the single biggest lobbyist for the banking industry. When I say banking industry, she wants 5 or 6 big banks where that she can control. Let's also remember she got on national TV and Meet the Press and said that America was ready for a Federal Reserve issued central bank digital currency. And George Orwell started spinning in his grave just at the mere concept of that policy that she promotes. But no, if we look at her bill, she calls it the anti, money laundering as it applies to crypto bill or something like that. It's really what I call it is the banker's ban of Bitcoin bill. It was written by the Banking Policy Institute of this country, which is led by JP Morgan Chase and Bank of America and the rest. And so, no, it's all about control for someone like her. So she gets up there and engages in all this rhetoric about the banks, but she favors the banks because she wants to control the banks. And so that's why I call her the bank lobbyist.
Now, we're talking about crypto here on the show. You just mentioned a few moments ago a bunch of different issues that are important to Americans that you are running your campaign on. Do you think that crypto is that important to voters? I know we talk about it a lot. I know there's a lot of crypto money coming in to support candidates like yourself in this election. But is crypto one of the standout issues for people who are going to the polls, do you think?
I mean, listen, I think that, I can tell you that's why I called her the crypto candidate. When you talk about voters in Massachusetts, they're really talking about the migrant crisis and it's bankrupting the state. It's taxing the infrastructure, emergency rooms, urgent cares are full, schools are being impacted, and then the cost of living, they're being priced out. So I don't believe crypto is like a top 5 or top 10 topic. Now, there are a lot of young Democrats who have joined me who believe in crypto. But when you think about it, Senator Warren should be a proponent of this. I got into crypto and Bitcoin because I remembered my mother begging the check cash. She couldn't keep a bank account because she couldn't keep the minimum deposit. So she had to go to those check cashing stores that you see in the hood, and they would take 15, 20%. I remember my mom begging them, please don't take as much. Can you only take $10 instead of $20 from her welfare check? So when I sent my mother money through MoneyGram or Western Union when I was in college for my younger sisters, I'd send her $100. She'd only get 88 because they would take 12%, Western Union would. So when I thought of Bitcoin, I read the white paper, I was like, wow, we can cut out the predatory fees of the middlemen, the banks or the MoneyGrams and the Western Unions. People could send money. It could uplift underbanked or unbanked people. And so if Senator Warren truly was for poor people like I am and for expanding the middle class, you would think that psychologically, philosophically, she would be behind crypto, but she wants control. That's why she wants a Federal Reserve issued CBDC.
So you're running as a Republican in Massachusetts, a party or a state that's going to vote, I assume, very heavily for Kamala Harris. Are you supporting Donald Trump in this race?
No, Donald Trump lost by 33 points in 2020. You notice he never has a rally in Massachusetts. And I want people to know that I was told, John, you're wasting your time. You'll never win the Republican primary if you don't support former President Trump. And I got 65% of the vote, despite 2 other people on the candidate. There was 3 people on the ballot because people are ready for common sense. That doesn't mean I'm against. See, if you're a U.S. senator, it shouldn't matter who the president is, right? You should have one test. Is it good for Massachusetts and America? If it is, It shouldn't matter whether it's called a Democrat proposal or Republican proposal. Shouldn't matter who sits in the White House. And that's the test I will bring. If President Trump wins this election, I'm going to want President Trump to be successful. And if he proposes something that's good for Massachusetts, America, I'll be the biggest fighter for it that you've ever seen. If Vice President Harris wins, same test applies. And I think that's what we need to get back to. I think people are ready to have nonpartisan people that don't have a loyalty to the party or an agenda or a person, but just have loyalty to the country. I served in the United States Marine Corps for 7 years. I literally gave my back to the Marine Corps. I love this country. I wouldn't be in this race if we didn't live in a great country. I am the American dream, and I'm going to go to the Senate and fight for it. And that's what motivates me, not crypto. It motivates me to preserve. I don't want to be one of the last poor people in this country to make it out of poverty and make it out of the ghetto. And that's why I'm running.
On the topic of the candidates who are running for president, just curious to hear your thoughts after the Trump-Harris debate the other night. We shared a video on CoinDesk yesterday, I believe, sharing reactions from crypto Twitter. What was your reaction?
Well, listen, I was disappointed. It's more of what I think, the country doesn't need. We don't need finger pointing politics. We don't need divisiveness. We need to come together. 35 trillion in debt, 1.2 credit card trillion in credit card debt with delinquencies rising, 1.7 trillion in student loan debt. We pay $3 billion a day in interest alone. If we cut every dollar in discretionary spending and only used spent money for mandatory spending, we're still at a deficit. You can't tax enough. You can't cut enough. We need real world solutions to these problems, but we've got these people who just want to point the finger. They tell you that there's only 2 tribes in this country, right? And that the other tribe, they tell you to choose a tribe, and then they tell you that the other tribe doesn't love the country the way you do. That's nonsense. We all have more in common, and I think people are ready for my approach, which is one of unity, lifting people up without dividing people. I think people are ready for a positive message, and I'm going to give it to them.
You're running to be a senator. You're going to go to the Senate, but you're not running as an independent. You've talked about being nonpartisan. You're running as a Republican.
Sure.
So when you get to the Senate, are you going to vote for the Senate Republican leader, and will you then effectively be part of changing the control of the Senate from one party to another?
Well, let me tell you, Senator Warren is out there, and she's using this example as a reason not. When she was asked what's wrong with my policies, she came up with crypto, and then she said, well, we don't want the Senate to flip. She doesn't realize she's so blinded by partisanship that she's making the case for me. I'm a nonpartisan person. My loyalty is to Massachusetts and the country. And so on certain issues like abortion, I will caucus with the Democrats if, in fact, there is some kind of bill that is going to ban abortion for women. I have 3 daughters. I will caucus with the Democrats on that issue. When it comes to fiscal policy, if it's going to inflate our deficit even more, I'll probably caucus with the Republicans on that. I could actually give, in a split Senate, I would actually give Massachusetts a voice that it hasn't seen in decades, because Elizabeth Warren is just another partisan person, right? She's a partisan hack from the other side. And the Republicans have their partisan hacks too. But if someone comes to the Senate that says, hey, I have this one loyalty to my state and my country, and I'm not blinded by partisanship, it's actually what we need. And I think I'm ready to give that voice to Massachusetts. And I think it's the number one reason to vote for me.
All right, John, we got to wrap it there. Thank you so much for joining us, and good luck with the rest of your race.
Hey, can I just say, go to johndeatonforsenate.com, please, and help me.
John, thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thank you. Have a good one.
All right, we are moving right along here. If you are just joining us, we are live on CoinDesk's socials. I'm Jen Sanasie. That's my co-host, Renato Mariotti, and we talk about everything crypto policy and regulation. And now we're going to talk about FTX. Renato, you and I used to talk a lot about FTX, and we haven't in a while with this election.
Yeah, that's for sure. Well, I think it's, in some ways, for a lot of people, it's yesterday's news. But there's some people for whom it is central to their lives, right? The remaining defendants who have yet to be sentenced.
Yeah, one of those being former FTX executive Caroline Ellison. Her sentencing is coming up on September 24th. So, Renato, the next time you and I meet to do this show, it will have happened. And I'm sure we'll have a lot to talk about. If our audience needs a refresher, Ellison ran Alameda Research. That was a hedge fund that was attached to FTX. She was also the on and off again girlfriend of Sam Bankman Fried. Now, Renato, the sentencing is coming up in about a week and a half. What are you expecting to happen here? Do you think she's going to get prison time?
I think she likely will. I would be surprised if she didn't receive any prison time whatsoever. Keep in mind, Sam Bankman-Fried received a pretty substantial sentence. She was very much involved in that. Of course, there's an important difference between her and Sam Bankman-Fried in that she immediately cooperated with the government. She testified on the government's behalf, the prosecution's behalf at trial, and her testimony was part of what buried SBF. In fact, the defense team, the Caroline Ellison legal team, has quoted the prosecution's closing argument, noting that the prosecution was citing her testimony to great effect during closing arguments. And so I do think that the judge is going to take that into account. It's always different when you're taking responsibility for wrongdoing versus being someone like SBF who was violating bond conditions and defiantly taking the stand in your own defense. So I do think she's going to get a very substantial reduction. I also think that who she is will play a factor as well. I do think that she is she's a young woman who I think would potentially, not do well behind bars, and I think her legal team's going to be making that argument as well.
Yeah, some of the comments that came up, her attorneys referenced John J. Ray III, who's the current CEO of FTX. He said that she was valuable in helping his team take over the exchange. They also referenced some other cases where attorneys said that Ellison was valuable. I imagine that's probably going to help her in this. But I have a question for you. I said in my intro that she was the on again, off again girlfriend of Sam Bankman-Fried. And I'm just curious from your experience, if you are romantically involved with someone like Sam Bankman-Fried and you get tied up in this, does the judge take that into consideration given the dynamics of the relationship?
Yes, and that's often an argument that is made by defendants. I mean, it's not uncommon for in any kind of crime, whether it doesn't have to be crypto related or even a white collar crime, for someone who's romantically involved with someone to be caught up in it. In narcotics cases, narcotics trafficking cases, often the girlfriend of the drug kingpin ends up getting charged because she helped as a courier on one or two occasions, something like that. And that's often the argument made by the defense. Like, it was not in that situation by their attorneys. It was not. This was done out of love and done because that person was manipulated by essentially the real wrongdoer. And so there was a very thin line that was drawn in the argument for Caroline Ellison that's along the same lines, Jen, where they essentially said, look, she takes responsibility for what she did, but she was reluctant to engage in it and essentially trying to suggest, like, hey, this is SBF's fault for nudging her and cajoling her to go in this direction.
Okay, so I know sometimes I ask you to bring out your crystal ball. If you were going to make a prediction, I think the last prediction you made was pretty spot on. What do you think the sentencing is going to be for Ellison?
That's tough.
Okay.
Because SBF is like, I think I predicted, 20 years, I think something like that. Didn't he get a little over
25.
that?
I
Something?
think you got 25.
Yeah, 25, 20. Yeah. So I think for her, I think I wouldn't be surprised if she got what's a year and a day. A year and a day under in the federal sentencing system means that you actually serve 10 months because you get credit for good behavior essentially while you're in prison. And that would essentially give her some prison time, would send a message to her, would mean that she's not getting off scot-free. I think it'd be hard for the judge to say she just walks. But it's possible. It's possible she gets home confinement. But my gut is that she gets a year and a day in prison.
Yeah, her attorneys are saying that she should be sentenced to time served and supervised release. What are the chances? What are the chances she gets that?
Well, she has a shot at that. Actually, a pretty good shot because the probation department's asking for that. So it's possible, and very well. I mean, it's just. I think it's actually not an unreasonable argument by her attorneys. It's the argument I would be making if I was in their shoes. But the judge is gonna have to weigh. I think it's one of those options. Either she's gonna get time served, maybe she gets home confinement for some period of time, or whether she gets some prison time. I think the challenge for the judge to get his head around is she, of course, is pleading guilty to many of the same crimes that Sam Bankman Fried was convicted of. And of course, as you mentioned, he got 25 years in prison. And so it's quite a disparity, obviously, a very significant difference between a cooperator and somebody who went to trial and violated his bond conditions. And the judge believed that he lied on the witness stand and so forth.
All right, we are going to talk more about FTX, but if you are just joining the show, you have the ability to talk to Renato and I by leaving a comment or a question below this video. We are live on CoinDesk's socials, and we are talking about everything crypto policy and regulation. Earlier, we spoke to John Deaton. He is, of course, running for Senate against Elizabeth Warren. If you missed that interview, you can just, I believe, scroll backwards and start from there and then get caught up afterwards. All right, let's move on to this next piece, Renato. Also has to do with FTX. Ryan Salem, who is FTX Digital Market CEO. Now, he was already sentenced to 7.5 years in prison. He was apparently offered a plea deal by the government, and now he's saying that the government didn't hold up their side of the bargain. And it's reported that they're going after his partner, Michelle Bond, who is also the mother of his child. And so, what do you make of this? He filed a petition with the judge to throw out that deal. Then he tried to revoke the petition. And the judge said, "Actually, no, we're gonna do the hearing on this petition." What do you make of what's going on here?
So essentially, what he says is that there was a verbal conversation with the prosecutor in which she said, "Look, we will stop going after your paramour, girlfriend, partner, whatever, as long as you plead guilty." And essentially, he's saying, "Well, that should be held against the Justice Department. That was a deal." He has to take. He took into account in the same filing that the deal that he signed said that this written deal, which doesn't include that provision,
Even I know you need to
supersedes.
get everything in writing.
You got to get it in writing. Supersedes all the any prior understanding, and he tries to get around that. I mean, I'll just say, Jen, look, negotiating with the Justice Department is difficult. It's like negotiating with Darth Vader, where he's like, "Pray I altered the deal. Pray I don't alter it further." Right? It is. You have to. They have all the cards and all the power. And so you need to get everything, like you said, Jen. I mean, it's just common sense. You need to get things in writing if it's real. I think what happened, and the reason you mentioned that he withdrew this is I think he understood this was an extremely uphill battle and was probably just going to piss off the judge, who's
Who
also going to be the
already is
person.
not very happy with this trial, Judge Kaplan. He was
Yeah.
really, not having any shenanigans.
Right, and he's essentially, this is the same guy who's going to sentence you, right? So
Mhm.
understandably, maybe decided that this was not the best idea. But the judge, why is the judge going forward? Because you raised that, I think, that issue. Because if the judge doesn't decide this and have a hearing now, what could happen is after sentencing, while he's, let's say, sitting in prison and regretting everything that he's done, he may suddenly say, "Well, no, my attorneys convinced me not to make this argument," or
Mhm.
something like that. The judge is like wants to do away with this now, and get it all resolved so that this way he never has to see this case again.
So I know that there is a hearing happening on this today. What do you think is going to happen?
It's not going to go very well for Ryan here. I think the Justice Department is going to prevail, and it's largely for the reasons you said. I mean, in other words, there's a written agreement. He acknowledged in writing that this is the whole agreement, and that's that. Essentially, what he's trying to argue is the Justice Department made some verbal statement to him. Maybe he'll get his former attorneys to corroborate him on that. There is some suggestion in his filing that they might. But I don't know if the attorneys are going to want to stick their neck out and do that. And in any event, all it really is going to be is sort of a verbal statement by prosecutors that, this was our intention at that time. But I don't think the judge is going to find that that was part of an agreement that induced him to plead
Mhm.
guilty.
Well, that's interesting you say that the government might say this was our intention at the time. Could they just say, as we got more information and evidence against Michelle Bond and what they are going after her for, we decided that actually our intentions were not founded and we have more information now to make a better decision or a better path forward?
Absolutely. And that's the sort of thing the Justice Department does. In other words, they'll say, okay, we think we have a deal. And then they find out more information or get more evidence. And suddenly that changes. Suddenly they have a different position. And that's why there's always a lot of caveats whenever
Mhm.
you're talking to the Justice Department. Things usually aren't binding unless certain key decision makers, like higher level decision makers, sign off. When I was a federal prosecutor, I couldn't just make promises on my own, like sign my own plea agreements and immunity letters or things like that. There's always some bigwig who has to sign off on that sort of thing. And usually when you're having verbal conversations, you're couching it in terms of like, here's my understanding right now. It could change. I need to get approvals and so on. And so I really highly doubt that the prosecutor was giving her solemn promise about what she would do. She was essentially saying maybe, if anything, her understanding at the time based on the information she
Mhm.
had.
Renata, you said just a second ago you're not sure that Ryan's attorneys would want to stick their neck out and say that their understanding was something else. Why might they not want to do that in this case? You think that your attorney is going to fight tooth and nail for you?
They will. I mean, they have an ethical obligation to fight for you. But, I mean, this is going to lose. Okay, so first of all, it's not going to necessarily make a difference for the client. They and the attorneys have to take into account their credibility in front of the judge. I mean, so that's one issue. And because the judge, I don't think, is going to have much patience for this argument. There are also sometimes the attorneys are repeat players in front of the Justice Department. So, for that reason, they're going to be very thoughtful about what they say and how they say it. Now, I will say, look, I go up against the Justice Department all the time. I have a jury trial on Tuesday against the Justice Department. I definitely go hard at the Justice Department. But, in this circumstance, I do think that his attorneys are probably telling Ryan that this is not going to go anywhere, and this is not, we have to go through the motions here because the judge now wants to go through this now that we filed it. But it's clear from his tone or other signs or what they understand the evidence to be that it's not going to succeed. So we just need to get through this as expeditiously as possible. I suspect, I don't know, I haven't talked to anyone, I have no inside knowledge here, but that is my suspicion of how this situation is going down.
Okay, last question here. I don't want to beat a dead horse, but given that, why file the petition in the first place? What do you think the mindset was when they filed it?
So, Jen, facing a prison sentence, and just federal indictment in general, but certainly once you've actually pled guilty and you face a prison sentence, it is a life altering thing. It's
Mm.
like being diagnosed with cancer or something. It is very difficult for somebody to go through. Facing prison time when you're somebody in his shoes, very hard. It's not like, I back when I was a federal prosecutor, I prosecuted some people who expected that they would be in prison eventually when they got caught. I don't think he falls into that bucket. And people who don't expect this, it's very hard to come to grips with. And so I think if at a certain period of time he felt this was unfair, and I'm sure he loves the mother of his child and wants her to not face the same fate he did. And that's often a motivator. I mean, it is the case that the DOJ often investigates family members of people that they want to build a case against for one reason or another, particularly in a high profile case. And I think he's motivated in many ways by his desire to be helpful to her. But unfortunately for him and her, I don't think that is going to work in this instance.
All right, Renato, we are going to wrap it there. Another great show in the books, Renato. It's always a pleasure hosting Crypto and Policy with you. And I know you have a jury trial next week, so I'm sure you're going to go, you got to prepare for that, and good luck.
Thank you.
And thank you to everyone who watched. We do this every other week on CoinDesk's social channels. We discuss everything crypto and policy. So come back, tune in, share your questions with us.